Welcome back, everyone, to Movies After Midnight.
Yay.
I am your host, Evelyn. I am joined once again by Aaron.
Hi, it's me, Aaron.
Yay.
I just wanted to apologize to everybody for my horrible mic quality in the last episode. I was in a daze. And the second thing I want to do is thank everybody for making that the number one viewed episode of Movies After Midnight.
Yeah, you guys either really like The Howling Reborn or you really like questionable audio quality.
Which I get it if you like the questionable audio quality.
It makes things organic, you know?
We just wanted to add character to how we were delivering the podcast news, and it was actually a Brechtian tactic to make you guys aware of the fact that you're listening to a podcast.
Exactly. But yeah, speaking of The Howling, we have finished the Howling series. And so now we are moving back in time to a much better known franchise, but before we can get into the territory that this podcast usually covers of, like, you know, stuff you may not have heard of, we have to deal with some bullshit that is like a decent and well-known movie. That being 1931's Frankenstein and The Bride of Frankenstein.
Both bangers. Absolute bangers.
They are really good, and you should see them if you haven't. Because, like, the Universal movies, like Frankenstein and Dracula specifically, like, they're both really interesting to go back to, because I feel like they come from this, like, cool, interesting juncture in, like, film history, where it's like we were just kind of getting, like, we were still figuring out what you could and couldn't do in, like, a talkie film, especially because, like, the way there's sometimes there's not music at times when there would be in a modern film, and things are very, like, stagey.
Well, it feels less like it in, like, it feels like they have their footing more in Bride of Frankenstein, which, like, I totally get being, like, a few years after the fact. But yeah, Frankenstein for sure. Everything from, like, the blocking to, like, the sets are so, like, sound stage for a silent film. It does really stand out.
Yeah. And I guess with the original Frankenstein, I wanted to point out, part of the reason it feels so staged is it's actually, like, adapted from a stage play, written, because I noticed this in the credits and I fell down, like, a research rabbit hole. It was specifically Frankenstein: An Adventure in the Macabre by Peggy Webling, which is really incredibly, like, apparently the script for that version of the play is incredibly difficult to find right now. It's like, it's in, like, there's, like, one or two in some, like, university libraries or something that you could, like, never get to.
Whoa.
But yeah, apparently that version, a lot of the things people point to this movie and are like, this movie did it differently from the book, and that's where everyone started thinking of that as Frankenstein. A lot of those things are actually, like, Frankenstein having an assistant, or the calling
Igor.
referring to the monster as Frankenstein, I guess, started with the play, because in the play she wanted to, like, illustrate the, like, parallels between him and the creature, so they were both called Frankenstein in the script. And I guess that's considered the cultural, like, origin of people calling the monster Frankenstein, and that whole, like, thing people go off on.
A little anecdote just to, like, uplift that point. I remember we had to read Frankenstein in high school, and one of the biggest discussions we had was how shocking how different it is than how we all culturally perceive Frankenstein. So, like, honestly, this film, I mean, Mary Shelley did write Frankenstein, but this film is what everybody thinks about, like you said, when people think about Frankenstein.
Yeah. It's very, which, again, I think is a credit to the film itself and how, like, striking it was.
I think it's a good decision.
Yeah, yeah, because it definitely.
It made some good shifts from the original novel that I think it does a really good job of, there's that discussion of like book versus movie, or in this case I guess it's play versus movie, but to just extrapolate it to like book versus
play
movie.
versus movie.
Book versus play versus, which came first. But to just extrapolate based off of that point, I think this does a good job of translating it for a new medium of storytelling.
Yeah.
And I think that's the real like testament to its strength as an adaptation.
For sure. Because there was also a Thomas Edison silent movie version, but Thomas Edison can go.
That one is
himself.
Bonkers. That one is literally crazy. That one is like Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde.
Kind of, yeah. I watched it recently, and yeah, that's a really good way of putting it.
Yeah, honestly, it's really like, it's kind of like grody for the, like, it's very like, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if like Cronenberg liked it.
I could see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is that that it has a sick like called the sick like red cell shading, right?
Yeah. And he like basically bakes the monster in an oven. Kind of.
It's crazy. It's so crazy. Oh my god, that's the other thing too that was really fascinating. I think on the whole, like before we get into like some of the finer details, but I was kind of like, I've seen this film so many times in my life, you know what I mean? But watching it for this, the last time we watched it, or when we watched it for this, Jesus, I can't talk. I was actually taken aback by the violence in it. It actually, it was really shocking to me. I really sunk in that this was like the slasher film of the time.
Oh yeah,
yeah,
well, yeah. Which that's a good segue into it. Actually, it starts out with like a guy coming up and being like, the movie you're about to watch is like so horrifying and stuff. You might not be able to handle it. We hope you enjoy it, but like this is your chance to get out now.
Carl and Lemley. I was like, okay. It's honestly so cute.
But like it's
a serious warning. It's like for serious.
Yeah, it's like a trigger warning kind of.
Yeah.
It's like Hitchcock at the start of Psycho being like, don't spoil the movie.
Protect the secrets. That's not what Hitchcock said.
Keep it secret. Keep it safe.
That's what somebody else. Why do I keep bringing up Fantastic Beasts 2? I don't even like it.
Yeah, that's like the word. Like, if you're gonna bring up a Fantastic Beasts movie, there's like a better one. Even.
I just want to always talk. I'm like, I could hear everybody getting bored of me, and I was just, if I wasn't talking about Fantastic Beasts 2, I was waiting for somebody else to bring it up. But sorry, Evelyn, continue.
And yeah, with that we get into the film itself, and like we were talking about, like this scene goes hard on just the vibe, like because like we start with this like it's like a graveyard, and there's like these crucifixes in the ground, and it's just like a really good like stark scene that's like it's like Victor it's not Victor. This is another thing. In the book, his name's Victor. In the movie, his name's Henry. Frankenstein. So Henry and Fritz is his like hunchback sidekick guy. And they're like stealing bodies from this like spooky graveyard, and it's just a really cool visual that I think is supposed to like it illustrates how like sort of far out he is like from the get-go in terms of like what he's doing and where he's willing to carry it out and stuff.
Yeah, and his assistant is super interesting because to us watching it, that's such a normal image. But this was the origination of like not just that Frankenstein as a character, the monster Frankenstein, but like that dynamic between like a mad scientist and his like hunchback servant, which really random actually, you know what I mean? That's interesting that took off. But the other thing about it is the set. It's like so obviously a set, but something about how picturesque everything is makes the experience still like incredibly spooky.
Yeah, well, it gives it, because I've thought about this with regards to Dracula, and I think in a lot of ways Frankenstein kind of like follows on the heels of Dracula. And I think one thing that they both have in common is that they almost have this kind of like dreamy, surreal quality to them, where like everything is like this like hyper real in this way. And I think like what you said about the sets, I think that complements it.
Yeah.
And I think, because also I think the crosses are, like, I wrote that the crosses are like, because also after they're leaving, they see a guy who's like just been hung, and he's like, hey, cut that guy down, we'll grab him too. And so Fritz has to like climb up and like cut the guy down. And
have you ever read about Descartes?
I was going to, but then I had to read about equestrians, and I didn't want to put Descartes before the horse.
I knew it was going somewhere. I couldn't tell you where, but I was like, oh no, that's so funny.
I've read a little, not a whole ton.
It's super interesting because I just like to talk about him in relation to Frankenstein always, because Descartes was literally insane. He's the guy who I believe he was I Think Therefore I Am. Yeah, he was I Think Therefore I Am, because he actually performed all of these he was literally like real life Frankenstein, because he was trying to prove his existence through like thought. So he would like dig up bodies and like, it was crazy. He's crazy. Look up Descartes if you really like Dr. Frankenstein.
Yeah. And yeah, we get that angle because it flashes to and we also get the scene with Fritz stealing the brain, and that's interesting. That scene is the other reason I bring up the Descartes, because I think that like whole question of like, what does it mean to be, or I guess it's like the whole interesting question is like, what does it mean to be human? But then you have this interesting interplay with the monster and his like innocence, but we'll get to that. It's like getting a little ahead of ourselves. Yeah. But the classroom scene is really why I bring up Descartes, because that whole like, I think therefore I am, what makes consciousness and things like that is very at the forefront. Yeah, because we're introduced to I think this professor who is played, another connection, he's played, I can't remember his name, but he's played by Edward Van Sloan, who was Professor Van Helsing in Dracula. So he's another like connective fiber between the two movies. But he's like, is he supposed to be like canonically the same person, or like two different people? He's two different people, but they're very similar in terms of like who they are and what their function in the story is. It's just they're twins. Yeah. They're like, we have this guy and there's one thing we're going to use him for. He's like Tom Hardy. He's playing like two. Yeah. But he's like giving this lecture on these two brains, and he's like, this is a criminal brain, and you can see it's like these parts about it are like what made him criminal, and this is like a normal person's brain. And like it's interesting because like something I've seen like in this and some of the later Frankenstein movies is they try to incorporate, it's like a mix of like mythology with what the current understanding of science was at the time. Yeah, I think it was that phrenology era. Yeah, or like where it was like measurements and calculations, and what you're born with says your intelligence. Yeah. Like super pseudoscience-y. Yeah, and like, because I thought that was an interesting angle in this movie, because like in the original story, he builds the creature, and the creature is just pissed at him for not, like, you know, taking responsibility and stuff. Whereas in this, it's almost as if to underline, like, everything he's doing would have worked if Fritz hadn't, like, dropped the good brain and, like, taken the bad one instead. And, like, I took that as, like, it's like a moral tale. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah, just philosophically, I feel like it alters the philosophy of the story kind of in an interesting way. Yeah, that feels like in service of like a production code, because we'll get to like the censorship of this movie, but like people went ham.
And I
Yeah.
would just love to see all the censors of like who wanted to censor this movie. I just want them all to like be in a theater, and I want to like show them like a Rob Zombie film.
They just have a heart attack
That's like
collectively.
my Victorian child.
And yeah, and as that's happening, we go back to Henry's future, or his bride to be, if you're Tommy Wiseau. um,
You are my rose.
we kept talking about that movie a lot, don't we?
We keep. I always sing that too. What the heck?
um, and she's talking with. There's like, I in my script, or my notes, I called him Victor the cuck, because his whole job in the story is to just kind of be a cuck.
I
where
mean,
he's, like,
basically,
he's clearly like into Elizabeth, but she's like set to marry Henry, so he's just like, well, I'm here if you need me.
also, okay, can I be honest with you?
Yeah.
Because I think it's a good time to start saying this, but like, I think this film is the most like Cabinet to Dr. Caligari of the Universal pictures.
Yeah. I can definitely see that.
Yeah, for sure.
That's also, I was gonna point out, this is a total side tangent,
I love it.
but the guy that plays Victor in this movie played what's his name? He played Newland Archer in the 1934 version of Age of Innocence, and I just think that's funny. Because
You said Newland Archer, and my soul left my body, Evelyn. I don't think you understand.
I had to bring that up with you.
No, that's hilarious, and I get why you brought it up to me. But I just had to tell you, I just fully dissociated for a second.
It was just like your brain got slapped.
It was like I was Regina George and I got hit by that bus. Holy shit. That's so wild, though. That kind of makes a lot of sense. They feel like a similar character archetype. Because I feel like Newland Archer hits this place where, like, he feels like he's like one step away, because he's not an artist, but he hits that, like, intellectual archetype where he feels like he understands the world. He feels like he's above the world around him because he, in his mind, doesn't think he's like everybody else, but he forgets that he's still kind of bound by the same rules as everybody else. And I think in a way that's what Henry Frankenstein is going through. So I think in a way that just proves my theory about like vibe casting.
Yeah. Well, it's,
or like really specific typecasting, I guess, you know.
Yeah.
But what were you gonna say?
Because that's even more. Because it's like he's the guy who's not Henry Frankenstein, but he is, because they gave him his name from the book, and it's but basically they're talking about how like they haven't heard from Henry in a long time, and he's like been off, and he like wrote to her about how he's doing crazy experiments, and she's like, I'm kind of worried for him, I wish he'd just come home and marry me. And so they resolve to like go
and then
off
like
and see
hard
what
cut
the
to
hell he's
Henry
doing.
like doing
Yeah.
hard cut to Henry digging up bodies.
Yeah. And I wrote like so Henry Frankenstein is played by Colin Clive, and I wrote he does such a good job being like this guy who like broods and like simmers a lot. Like, I don't know what the exact term for it is, but he
is a hell of a stage actor.
But he like glowers really well. That's the word. And he like, he does a really good job of portraying this character who like you understand, like, as much as he's pushing these like moral boundaries, you kind of get why he's so pissed off, because he's like I have all these ideas and literally no one understands them, and they all kind of just dismiss it and like only care about me getting married. And so, like, as, like, every time people talk to him, you see him getting just a little more pissed off about it and a little more committed to, like, proving everyone wrong.
Which, in a way, like, Henry's just going through every woman's experience. I had a friend recently who got engaged, and she said I've had a lot of things I've done in my life that have been these huge accomplishments, but like people only care about that I'm engaged. Isn't that super wild? But it is very much what Henry is going through. Also, I think his actor Colin Clive does a great job of like, I love an actor where you can see them thinking.
Yeah.
And you can like see every single thought he's thinking, and I think that's stellar.
Yeah. Because that's also like, knowing. I think James Whale, who directed this, I think he was like out as gay. Because there was that movie where Ian McKellen played him.
Oh wow! I had no idea.
Yeah, and so I'm always like looking for that. Like once I learn that. Because I think, like, I can see, like, I don't necessarily see it as, like, a gay story, but I do see it as, a story where it makes sense that angle of, like, this, like, heteronormative, like, standard being, like, kind of this constant frustration, like, kind of makes sense.
I haven't really seen as much queer readings into Frankenstein, but I have heard people talk about it in relation to Bride. But, like, I guess the whole Henry being absent from his wife kind of, I feel like, is part of the subtext, for sure.
Yeah. But,
he's just, like, not interested in marrying his wife, but, sorry, continue.
So his wife and Victor, they go to meet the professor, and they're like, what's he been doing? And he's like, yeah, we kicked him out of the university, he's been doing shit up in this old windmill. And I think he's been digging up bodies, and they're like, that's weird. And so they're
like, oh.
they go up, because it's like there's like he's like using something about using cadavers, and the Victor's like, well, sure, a few dead animals isn't that bad. And he's like, no, it's not that.
Which, what do you mean a few dead animals isn't that bad? It's super fascinating, because that line I feel like was written scientists realizing that killing dead animals is the first sign of a violent person or messing with dead animals.
Now that you point it out,
it feels like it kind of predates that, but that's okay.
But yeah, so they arrive at the windmill. Fortuitously,
excuse me, the lab.
Yeah,
no, I'm just kidding.
Windmill with a lab in it.
His lab, his very serious lab,
with. They arrive exactly at the moment they are preparing to perform the experiment and like juice this body up with life. And he's kind of trying to like shoo him off at first, but they won't leave. And so he's like, fine, I'll come look at this shit. And yeah, again, another extremely like classic movie scene of like the machinery and like the lightning and everything. And
Metropolis is hell.
Oh shit, yeah, I forgot about
that. Very robot,
right.
Maria. Yeah. Which, like, Metropolis started the mad scientist, so that makes sense why Metropolis is there, you know?
Yeah. And he's like, this was another interesting moment of censorship I read, because his line, like, we get the whole, it's alive, and he's like, he says, in the name of God, or by God or something, now I know what it feels like to be God. And that line was originally censored by just like basically taking the lightning sound effects and like playing them really loudly over the end of his line in like the original versions of the film. And then later when it got re-released, they uncensored that. But it's another, like, yeah, censors in this movie, man. There's been...
This was the era where there was like a crazy list.
Yeah.
Which I encourage anybody, if you haven't looked up the censorship list in this era,
or that,
it's insane.
That one photo shoot,
the code.
Where they deliberately like went down the list and placed everything to violate like every single thing that they could from the code.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's and then we kind of time skip a little bit, where the other two, like, so they've seen that he like brought a monster back to life, and they're kind of like trying to cover for him back home because his father, the Baron Frankenstein, who's a very interesting character.
I feel like I just have to cut in really quick, and we have to discuss for a second.
Okay.
The monster looks insane. It's aged so well.
Oh yeah.
They slayed it.
Yeah,
more practical effects, please, for future.
Because it's Karloff had a good like he has a very like hard face, and so like the makeup was able to play off that really well, and like and also just the lighting and the presentation and everything.
Yeah, for sure.
And like his intro is interesting too, which we get at a little bit after, because what is it? Because they're like talking to his father, and his father like goes out, is like, well, I'm gonna go see him, and then we cut back and we get the introduction of the monster where he like enters the room. He enters the room walking backwards and then kind of like spins around. And that's another very staged thing, because it's like, in real life, this would be very silly, but for the purposes of the film and like revealing the monster, it works super well.
And like it works too because they're playing with your expectations of what you think the monster is gonna be.
Yeah.
Because they've set up this like, oh my god, criminal brain, oh my god, XYZ, oh my god, evil, and then he's just like not. He's just kind of like a big kid. Which that part also felt incredibly, that's the part that really feels fully Cabinet of Dr. Caligari to me, because it feels like that moment with Cesare at the end when they're all in like the mental asylum, and like Cesare, he's like a violent criminal, he's been killing all these people, and like he's just like sitting there with like a bouquet of flowers, which I think they even have the bouquet of flowers with the monster.
You know what?
Like the monster picking flowers, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I just think it's incredibly interesting. It's like very interesting too in the way that this film occupies like a horror film of the time. Like having the like horrific monster be so childlike is so fascinating. It's just an interesting decision.
Yeah, which it's interesting to me how because I feel like within the text of the film, the creation of the monster is supposed to be like a very bad thing. And it's like never questioned how bad it was to create him, but also at the same time the monster has this like sympathetic angle to him that kind of like plays against that a little.
And I know in that way, for me, that's like the hardest part of the film. It's not that like you're scared of the monster, it's that you like have to watch through this like innocent thing be like corrupted by the people around it who are misunderstanding it. So it's a very interesting in that way.
Yeah.
As we get into that kind of section.
But yeah, so he like, it seems like the monster's okay at first, and then he starts like, he reacts to fire. And also like, this is where I've noticed like Fritz starts being just kind of a dick, because Frankenstein's like, get that fire away from him, and Fritz starts like waving the torch like right in his face.
Yeah, and it's like that interesting like, we're like Rambo as a modern retelling of Frankenstein. I feel like there's a film studies paper out there.
Why? Yeah, wait a minute. Why does that kind of hit?
Because that's kind of like, you know, it's like, yeah, it's everybody antagonizing this thing, and then him reacting out in protection, trying to protect himself, and everybody saying, look at how evil this thing is because it's trying to, you know, it's trying to enact violence. It's like it's a very interesting like through line for like, it feels like an abuse narrative.
Shit, yeah.
You know?
Well, also, yeah, because also thinking now with like, because it seems like Fritz really dislikes the creature and enjoys tormenting him, and we don't get a lot of these character moments, but there's an interesting like angle in that where with Fritz being like a hunchbacked outcast, and so like a lot of his contempt for the monster feels like, you know, like projection of what you can imagine he's probably been through.
Yeah. That's a good point. And Fritz kind of, yeah, he just sets off the chain reaction.
Yeah.
For
which he gets his comeuppance very, very shortly.
which, yeah,
they're like, man, we haven't heard from Fritz in a while. Then you hear like him scream off screen, and they go down and they see the monster has like hung him. Which is an interesting choice, because like the monster feels like very like direct and very brutal. So the fact that he would do something as indirect as like hanging with like a rope and stuff is interesting.
Oh my god, you know what? That's such an excellent point.
And like, yeah, like maybe that's just a writing contrivance, but it feels really interesting.
I like to feel that the monster felt like he couldn't go toe to toe with Fritz in that way, and he was humanizing him through not brutalizing him and hanging him instead. I don't know. That's my film studies reading.
But yeah, this kind of like realizing that he got the damaged brain, and that this monster is like capable of killing and stuff, that kind of like takes the wind out of Henry's sails, and he's like, this sucks, I've like failed. And
which I'm so sorry not to cut you off, but
no,
I feel like that's the part of the movie that's like the horrifying part, because he's like not evil.
Yeah,
like he's not even evil, he's like protecting himself, and yes, this extreme way in this extreme scenario, but like to immediately jump to like he is evil and he must be destroyed is so fascinating to me.
Yeah. And so he's like ready to give up, and the Baron's like, well, you need to destroy this thing. And so he like Henry goes home with his father, and the professor is like going to basically do this autopsy and destroy the monster, but they mention that like it's been taking more and more sedative to keep the monster like sedated. And so he wakes up during the autopsy and chokes the professor to death, and then like escapes into the countryside.
Which I'd like to also point out, the professor this whole time has been injecting him with all these drugs, so like the monster isn't making these decisions out of malice and like just the love of killing. Yeah. He's like almost like he doesn't understand his strength, he doesn't understand like the world he's in. And yeah, seeing like what people are scared about within the movie, I think like in terms of how it was censored and like the discussion points of it, it says a lot about the time that the monster was the one who was the like scary one.
Yeah.
Like it feels so deliberately set up that way, where like it's like a divine misunderstanding, that how it's like tragic, but everybody seems to read it as like it's this scary monster who's evil, which is very fascinating. It's just interesting.
Yeah. Well, have you seen that thing where it's like,
come on, what murder? Sorry.
It's some like it's like a Fox News thing or something, where it's like the headline is like, snowflake students believe that Frankenstein's monster was a misunderstood victim, and someone's like, that's just the story though. That's
literally the story. Yeah.
That's the text.
And so honestly, the film is like, it's frustrating to watch, but not frustrating because of the filmmaking. You're like, yeah. I think meant to feel frustrated, which I think is very good and well done by the filmmakers.
Yeah. Because so then we kind of get, again, we get the like two plot branches now, where we have Henry, who's like being married, and they're like celebrating and stuff, because they're like, oh, finally he's put these cockamamie ideas out of his head, and he's gonna sit down and marry. Like, this is where I started wondering about the queer subtext, because it is like there is almost this idea of like, you need to sit down and get married to a nice woman, and that'll like stop you from being so weird. And I feel like that's like a very like common thing that like I can imagine, like especially at the time, that like a queer person would hear.
Yeah, because I think it's also important that like a lot of films of the time had that exact plot thread in the reverse, where it was the woman dodging the marriage.
Mm, yeah.
I think, and so I think you're right. I think that's definitely where the subtext is for sure.
Yeah.
That would make sense.
And then we get what's considered a classic scene, and was also I guess this scene was cut out in some of the original ones, where there's like this girl who's like throwing flowers into the water, and the monster like sees her, and like being a little girl, she kind of it doesn't really like care that he's like all weird and stuff, and she's like,
Which is so funny because it's almost like the best interaction he has with anybody is with a child.
yeah. And that's, yeah, which again, like, I feel like this is all like underlining what you were saying, where it's like there is this innocence, and like another like innocent child is I don't know what my voice just did. Another innocent child is able to like connect with that.
You couldn't say the word innocence. You're too not innocent.
I'm too debased.
You're too exactly.
I choked on it. But yeah, but she's like throwing flowers, and he throws her into the water, thinking like, not understanding that like there's a difference between her and flowers, and like so she drowns, and it's like all this accident, which again, like, I think, because that's really interesting, because I think this scene, honestly thinking about it, because if this scene got censored, I could understand a lot of people not getting the full, like, having a misunderstanding of the monster. Because, like, I feel like the scene with the little girl is so important to, like, underlining the like, that, like, he's not intentionally killing and stuff.
Yeah, he has, like, a very clear, like, he's very clearly confused at, like, what he's done. And it's clear that he realizes that he's made a mistake. It's like that, like, he's constantly misunderstanding his own strength, which I think is like, yeah, he's like a big monster, but I think that's something that's very normal for kids as well.
Oh yeah.
Is like kids sometimes breaking things, or kids sometimes not understanding how delicate things are. And so I think it just carries over that, like, his childlike essence. Yeah. And it's also really interesting because I think to take it even further, it brings a lot of questions to, like, how responsible. It's super interesting that Henry is setting up this domestic life for himself, but in the act of, like, creating life, he almost doesn't know. It's kind of like the idea of, like, having kids because you feel like you have to, not because you feel like you want to.
Yeah.
And so it's like Henry's not equipped to like have this domestic bliss because he doesn't understand fundamentally. He just thinks that creation begets itself, and that's where it stops, not realizing that, like, there's so much. It's almost like he gets so caught up with the allure of creating life that he forgets that, like, there's so much to life that has to be, like, taught.
Yeah.
And so he just leaves this monster to fend for himself.
Yeah, that's a really good insight, actually.
Thank you. It's rare of me. Yeah. No, I'm just kidding.
And so then, yeah, back at the wedding, we get an interesting scene where Elizabeth is like, she like freaks out because she just kind of psychically knows something's wrong, which was an interesting angle to this story that I feel like already has enough going on.
Oh my god, yeah. Can I actually talk about that in a little bit in a tangent?
Oh yeah, yeah.
So last night I went to I go to I'm a member at the Academy Museum. And so I go to, like, the screenings a lot, and once a month they have free screenings for people, for, like, the members. And this month it was the SFX department picked Apollo 13. And Apollo 13 had this through line where, like, the wife psychically knows something is going to go wrong. And it's not, like, discussed as overtly as that, but that's essentially how it's played. And I think this, like, females having psychic insight is so fascinating, and it's such an interesting trope.
Yeah, because we talked about that, like, in the I think we both took this like Hitchcock class a while back, where I think they, like, we talked about that as like a thing Hitchcock does a lot, where there's this like old-timey cultural idea of, like, the feminine as having some kind of, like, insight that like men don't have,
which maybe which is kind of funny because, like, it kind of can even be extended to that domestic example where like she's like the one who has the insight on the monster because she's like the feminine person who is like the mother, I guess, or it's mother, quote unquote.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think it's maybe it's not that deep, but like it's just kind of funny in that way. Men are like, what do women have that we don't get it?
Literally. Well, that's interesting because the play that this was adapted from, I guess there was a whole angle that they didn't include in the film where he like introduces the monster to his family, and he has a sister, and like his sister and his fiance kind of emotionally connect with the monster, and like there's like a whole like plot about that, and I feel like it kind of ties into the same thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, like after she has that, the monster appears, and this is again where the movie is very stagey, because it's like she's talking about feeling like something's wrong, and you see him like creeping in the window in like the background, and it's like a very like stage setup where you have like the foreground, background action.
Also, you got those kick-ass fade in and fade outs.
Oh yeah. And he I think he tries to grab Elizabeth, and I'm not sure why, but I think that's like a vestigial like part of the plot from the play that was cut out, where it's like because like she only matters because she's significant to Henry, to at least from as far as being connected to the monster.
It feels like Cabinet of Dr. Caligari again too.
Yeah, but he also, I think you mentioned that like this part of the story feels very like farce play, because they're like I think he's upstairs, and they all run upstairs, and then they hear a scream downstairs, and like, no, we have to go back downstairs, and it's like
and there's all this, yeah, it's honestly, it's just the final section is really a comedy of errors a little bit.
Frankenstein, a comedy of errors.
Yeah,
who needs to write that?
I'm kind of mad at, I want to bring up the monster in the window, but I learned that in a class, and I'm just mad at the whole part of my life, so I'm just not going to bring that up.
Oh, shit.
But it is something that's relevant if anybody's listening. I'm just going through a lot in my personal life, so for personal reasons, I can't discuss the monster at the window.
Yeah, that's fair. We do, speaking of personal things, we get this really great shot. So as Henry and some of the people at the wedding are like, we have to go like find this monster, we get this really great shot of the girl who drowned. Her dad is like carrying her body through this town where everyone's like celebrating, and we get this tracking shot where he is like, this actor is like completely like, he's like dead-eyed, and you get like absolutely conveying the look of a parent whose kid just died.
It's so chilling.
Like, yeah, and it like, you can see like everyone's celebrating, and then he walks past them, and they see him, and they're like, oh shit, and everything immediately like halts, and it's just such, it's like such a great visual, and I was honestly kind of surprised I didn't remember it more, because it's such a like,
oh sorry,
yeah, it's just such a like striking like visual.
Yeah, it's incredibly striking, and I think honestly it's so ironic to me that a lot of people look at these films and call them like over the top, or like not like the real life XYZ, or like too campy XYZ, because I feel like moments like that, they almost feel more close to reality than like a modern film that is priding itself on its realism.
Yeah.
And that's just something I really respect about this era in film, particularly.
Well, I think it's what is the term, like subjective reality?
Yes.
Where it's like,
yes.
Film isn't always about, it's not about what something was, it's about what something felt like, kind of.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point.
And yeah, I think that's a really good example of that. But so now like the film kicks into high gear, and we have the mayor of the town is like because all these people are like, there's this thing
man.
like killing people.
I'm so sorry, Evelyn. Could I bring up another point actually really quick before we
yeah.
move on?
Yeah, no.
This is just me like being a little high recording this, thinking a lot. And like, do you like it's so fascinating in a weird in a reception theory lens because of like how we've been talking about like the queer subtext, how we have like this little girl being in this, like, we saw it was a misunderstanding, you know what I mean? There was no actual like serious, like, there was no violence enacted on this girl. It was a misunderstanding that led to her death, right, from this like Frankenstein character. But like she's being used to like, you know, we got to go get rid of this monster, blah blah blah. That's such an interesting, like, because I feel like now everybody's using kids to like anti-LGBT, to like make anti-LGBTQ statements, and so I think it's so fascinating in a reception theory lens, for sure.
Yeah, I never thought about that. It's a little different because in M he actually is killing children, but it reminds me of him and how they're like,
Oh, M was so good. I haven't seen M in a minute. Oh, I want to watch M. M is incredible.
If you haven't watched M with Peter Lorre,
M by Peter Lorre. I visit Peter Lorre all the time at Hollywood Forever, and I tell him this all the time. One of the best performances of all time.
And at least until he performed with Boris Karloff in The Raven in 1950, whatever.
And then, you know, after that, he outdid himself with, shit, 1 second.
The Raven is actually a very goofy ass movie. Don't take that as a recommendation.
What year was The Raven?
What? The Raven?
Yeah.
What is it? It's like, Peter Lorre, Vincent Price,
Boris
year? Karloff, and Jack Nicholson.
Jack Nicholson.
It's like a extremely young
jump
Jack
scare.
Nicholson.
That's so funny. Yeah.
1963. I was mistaken.
Oh, okay. Because I was gonna joke that like I was gonna make that joke, but I was gonna use the movie Silk Stockings with Peter Lorre, the like musical he did. But you would already like put a later date, so The Raven is the best performance Peter Lorre ever gave, is what we're saying.
I mean, he did a good job. I don't know about the movie itself. It's a little.
No, I'm just kidding. We're just fucking around.
Yeah. But actually, to go back to the reception theory thing, that actually, because like, so they're organizing this big mob, and up on the stage they're like, the dad will take this group and you'll go over there, and me, the mayor, will go over there, and Henry, you take this group and go over there. And like, to my eyes, the way Henry taking control of an angry mob was framed, that feels like a fall to the dark side moment. But I don't think it's meant to be, but just like the way my like 2023 brain processes your main character joining an angry mob like that. And I don't know if it's like me just like reading things differently, or if there is this like, you know, where he's like completely bought into the societal dogma now and is like hunting down this child instead of trying to redeem it or whatever.
Yeah, because like just like directly in the story, the ending is so bittersweet because it just feels so cruel to like create this creature, not give him any context for the world around him, and then to like murder him for being in over his head. It's like, huh? But back to, that's getting a little ahead, but back to where you were at with the mom.
So we get there pretty quickly because they chase the monster down, and he like runs up into this windmill, and Henry splits off because he sees something, and he's like, I can like climb up these rocks and get there faster. And so he ends up chasing the monster up into the top of this windmill on his own, and they have this sort of face off. And there's again a really good visual where they're like seeing each other through the spokes of the windmill as it rotates. And There's also a shot where they're struggling and Colin Clive falls like directly butt first onto like the flames of a torch, and like he rolls off really quick, but you're like, that would have hurt. What a professional.
They didn't put him in like a big fire suit like Freddy Krueger.
Yeah. But
we don't see his butt suddenly really padded when he
no. Well, that's the thing. He doesn't catch fire or anything, and everyone's like, "How did he do that?"
he's a magic.
I saw someone like frame by frame break it down, and they're like, Did Universal have some kind of like magic fire at the time?" But so they're like struggling, and we get it was actually, speaking of like brutal moments, Henry falls, but he doesn't just fall. He like hits one of the like arms of the windmill, and then like falls off of that. And I'm like,
flops off.
It's just a very, it's partly comical and partly like, ow. And
it was like, what would have happened if Harold Lloyd fell down in safety last? You've just been bonking his body on everything.
Wait, no, that's wrong. Whose star was it that he landed on in Blazing Saddles? That was Buster Keaton, wasn't it?
I think that was Buster Keaton.
I was like, how did he do those stunts with such tiny hands?
I think that was definitely Buster Keaton.
That's neither here nor there.
Which I'm so sorry, I'm getting us off track. Have you ever heard Buster Keaton talk?
Oh God, no.
It is. Everybody just go look up how Buster Keaton talks. It was, you would not expect it.
This is getting way ahead, but that was a thing with Lon Chaney Sr. and how he, like, because he was like this huge silent film icon, and he was in one talkie film before his death, and it was like a really big deal because everyone was like, you're gonna hear this man that you've seen forever, and you're actually gonna hear what he sounds like talking in a movie.
Oh my God, that's so wild.
But but basically, so they're like, well, Henry's not in there anymore, so we can burn the windmill down. And they burn it down with the monster inside, and again, it's very sad because he's like, trying to get out and freaking out, but he's like afraid of fire still. Mm-hmm. And like, the whole thing goes down. And this feels like, I don't know this, but this feels like something that may have been edited to appease someone. Because I feel like the way they framed it, I feel like Henry was supposed to have died. But then we get this like tacked on end scene where they're like, oh, he's going to be okay. And that feels very like appeal to censorship-y. I don't know that, but it just feels that way.
I don't know if it feels it feels appeal to censorship-y in a like very subconscious way. Like it feels like the only reason it was in there was to give a happy ending because films at this time had to have a happy ending.
Yeah, because like I feel like you could have ended it with like the monster dying and it still would have like, it wouldn't really change a whole lot. But we do get actually in that scene we do get one kind of final irony where like because the Baron is like, yeah, my Henry's gonna be okay now, he can like give me a grandson, and he takes the wine from the servants and he's like, here's a toast to a son of the House of Frankenstein, and like the irony being that like Henry kind of produced him a son, and that like they all hunted him down and killed it, and like that's how the movie ends, which I thought was really interesting, and I haven't heard much about like the irony of that ending line.
Sorry, I just saw that they used a Tesla coil that was built by Tesla in that sequence where he turns into a monster, and I got so distracted.
Shit, that is so cool.
They like secured one Tesla cord. That's so fucking wild. Yeah, sorry, but could you repeat your point? My bad. That was my fault. I was like, Tesla. Yeah. I had like hearts in my eyes. I was just like...
You turned into a pigeon.
Have you guys gotten? This is so side note for Evie Override and her fans. Have you guys gotten to the Tesla Nancy Drew game yet? You and Sam?
Oh shit, we have not.
Oh my god!
I thought you were gonna say, did we do the Tesla Edison movie with Nicholas Hoult and Benedict Cumberbatch? Because we did cover that on this podcast
on Movies After Midnight.
Yeah,
you watch Nick. It with Nick.
But so the dad, like, he takes some wine from the servants and he gives this line where he's like, "Here's a toast to him producing a son to the House of Frankenstein." With the whole irony being, like, he did produce a son, and they hunted it down and like killed him. And so,
yeah. I think that goes back to that, like, it's cruel. Henry is not ready to be a father, and neither was his father.
That's also, I think, an interesting way, because they found a way to end it on a bittersweet note, even when they might not have been allowed to do so overtly. Because like, on the surface it feels like a happy ending, but like with that line it really emphasizes that it's not as happy as it could have been.
Yeah, 1000%.
And that leads directly into one thing I like about Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein is that they do work really well as like a part 1 and part 2 experience.
Yes.
Like, there's a few characters that have been recast, and so that takes a minute for your brain to, like, latch onto, but, like, in terms of story, like, they lead almost directly into each other.
And I think, there's a few years apart, but they feel like similar movies.
Yeah.
Son of Frankenstein is really when I felt like, okay, now this is like a different time and they're making movies based off Frankenstein. These two feel like a companion for sure. I agree with you.
Although the one hiccup is we get a different intro to Bride of Frankenstein where it's like this framing narrative of like the what is it? Mary Shelley, Percy Shelley, and Lord Byron are just like hanging out, and the dude playing Lord Byron is having so much fun. He's like rolling the hell out of his R's and like
they're like, "Oh, Mary, we love you. You're such a good author." Oh, which is so. If anybody knows anything about Mary Shelley's life, this is a crazy scene to fan fiction write about Mary Shelley.
Yeah. And they talk about how great her story was as a way of like recapping the first movie. Which is interesting because like her story has nothing to do with the movie, but
like, her story is it's like literally an adaptation. It's like 2 degrees away from Mary Shelley already. And the other thing that was kind of funny about that kind of scene in particular is that it's like the more things change, the more they stay the same. Because this is literally like, I think you've described it like this once in our personal conversations, but it's like the Avengers of like the like early cinema.
Yeah.
And just like having this scene, it just feels so like, you know what I mean? It feels so like content you'd see nowadays.
Kind of. Well, actually, that's an interesting thing because I was gonna say with the recap is interesting because it reminds you that this came out. I've watched other people talk about this series and they talk about how continuity is kind of like fast and loose because it comes from an era when people didn't give a shit as much, not in a negative way, but just they were like, it's not important to get every detail right, we're telling a story.
Actually, I have an observation. Oh, sorry. I thought.
Oh, I was just whereas now I feel like we're very caught up in the details and like, it's like this character couldn't do this because their power only covers this, and this. And like with the recap, it kind of ties into that because also this comes from an era when like if you saw a movie in theaters, you saw it in theaters, and then like 3 years later you saw the other one in theaters. You didn't have like DVDs at home you could go watch. So also I think the audiences, like their expectation for continuity was very different because it's not like a thing that people were obsessing over to the degree that we do now. Like, for example, when you make a podcast where you talk about movies in detail.
No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, now it reads as like one of those like crazy ads you'd get at the beginning of like Alamo Draft House, like the Love Witch telling you to silence your cell phone. Like this is just like you said, it's like filling that context for like the split between. But I think it's really I want to discuss this in really quickly in relation to Halloween, because I think if you're like a modern viewer who hasn't seen Frankenstein and Bride, but you have seen like Halloween, like it's kind of a little like Halloween, except in that the second one picks up immediately after the first. But I think the whole ending scene is very similar, where he gets pushed out. They just don't have the fire. You know, he gets pushed out and he survives a fall.
Yeah, I never thought about that, but yeah.
Yeah, it's super fascinating. And then, yeah, this one just picks up that same exact night.
Yeah, which...
in the same way that Halloween 2 is just immediately
which, again...
that night.
Yeah, that's a tangent that I think is interesting to get on, because, like, when you think about, like, I think there's a lot of that in Halloween, because when John Carpenter was like, I'm gonna make like a scary movie, his inspiration was like this or the Thing from Another World or whatever. And yeah, what, like, it's a thing I always think of, because like a lot of people now are like really wanting to like capture the 80s aesthetic. And I think to fully capture the 80s aesthetic, you need to remember that 80s filmmakers were trying to capture the 40s, 50s, and 60s aesthetic. So you really need to go like 2 or 3 degrees back and like see where stuff started. And I think this is a good place to do that.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. That's a good point.
Yeah, but so they're talking about it and they're like, yeah, that was a crazy story. And Mary Shelley's like, well, I've got more. And then that leads into this story.
The year was 1899.
It's
like in Golden Girls when she's like, when it's like Sophia.
Picture
like Sicily, 19th. Yeah, exactly.
And so yeah, we pick up pretty much immediately. The windmill is burned down, and like all the people are around, and the burgomaster is like, all right, everyone, get the hell out of here. Show's over. And they like, we get this, there's like a lady who's like kind of a screechy lady who's like kind of a recurring character here. And she's like, oh, I bet he weren't dead, governor.
I'm sorry, that caught me off guard.
I'm a good girl, I am.
What are you doing there? Oi! Oi, is you be dead? Oi, is you be mum? I'm dead.
You know what? My Fair Lady is my Roman Empire. I think about that movie like once a week. I don't know why. Wow, we got off track so fast.
I just wasn't expecting that.
But yeah, so she's there, and then there's like these other two. And like, this lady's like, it's the, I think it's supposed to be the family of the girl that died, because it's a different actor playing the father, but the father's like, I can't rest until I've seen that monster's dead body. And so he like hops, like he falls down into this ravine while he's looking, and you see that there was like a spring or something underneath the windmill, and that the monster fell in and survived. And so he like immediately takes this guy out. And then his wife is like looking over, and she's like, hey, what's going on? And he like sees her and like takes her out too. So like I think you mentioned around this point, like already we're getting like way more slashery with the like, he's getting a body count already, and there's like a lot more of the
it's been like 5 minutes.
Don't go in there kind of like suspense.
Yeah, and it's like, it's very much like murder, and it's like, it's not just the body count that feels slasher to me too, it's like the way he's like just bodying people.
Yeah, which again, like, because now he's pissed. He's like,
yeah,
everyone is trying to kill me, so I have no option but to assume everyone is a threat.
Which gets really interesting later on.
Yeah. Well, someone also pointed out like the way they use the makeup to show what he's been through. because like if you see his hair and stuff, there's parts where it's kind of burned away, and you can see like the like metallic staples holding his head together that you couldn't see before. And like it's a nice touch. But
I was agreeing like I was Frankenstein there. I was like,
That's we forget in the last movie. There's this really funny shot when he breaks into Elizabeth's room, and she screams, and he goes, "Arr!" But the way he says it, like it makes like he's trying to do like a tiger noise at her, like "Arr!" Hey, dollface. Anyway, so then we cut back to Henry. Henry played by Colin Clive again. Elizabeth played by a different actress. Took me a minute to process that.
It was a little jarring, to be honest.
And she and she's like, or they're like talking about how they're like glad he's alive, and he's like not gonna do monster stuff anymore. And then I can't remember the Cockney lady comes back because she sees the monster, and she goes to try and tell everyone, and they're like, "You're nuts. The monster's
I think
dead.
her name's
Leave us
Minnie.
alone." That sounds right. And she's like, "Oh well, I wash my hands of it then," and like. It's just a fun voice to do. I don't know why.
It's a study. No, I agree with you.
But so as Henry is because I think she's like a servant at the castle, and so she let Henry gets visited by this other professor named Dr. Pretorius, which is such a comic book villain name that like I always found it kind of jarring when he names himself, because I'm like, this feels much more comic book compared to like what we were doing a minute ago.
Well, also, like, I think his full name is like on a piece of paper or something. It's not just Dr. Pretorius, it's Dr. Septimus Pretorius. Like, that sounds like a fucking like transformer.
I hate that you're right.
Right? Isn't it great? It's like it took me out.
Praetor and roll out.
Yeah, I was like, who the fuck is this guy?
And they mentioned,
and then he's like, I make homunculi. And I was like, this guy just likes wacky names.
Well, also, they mentioned he was a philosophy professor. Because I think the guy in the last movie was like his biology professor or something. So I like the innate admittance that philosophy as a field is just a little more evil than some of the other sciences. And I'm like, you know what, that also, feels right.
The thing this film gets right about academia is that you can never get rid of professors.
Literally. But he's like, yeah, so he shows up and he's like, yeah, because he mentions he was like kicked out of the university for having radical ideas or something, and he's like,
yeah,
hey, I heard you made a monster. That's pretty dope. And
I think really quick side note too, to expand upon that like professor point, I guess I mean it's like there's this, I love the academia through line. I talk about this all the time in my own personal creative work, but like I love that academic who feels like they're out of the world. Because they're like processing the world, so like they feel like they don't participate in the same way. And I think like at the end of the day, that's been kind of part of the crux. So it's like you almost kind of can track the cycle of violence that's like going from you almost like get like a character study into how Henry got here through his like mentors. It's very interesting.
Yeah. But like, yeah, so Henry's like, I'm not making monsters anymore. That ended terribly. And Praetorius is like, oh, I didn't know you turned into a bitch while I was gone. He doesn't say
like
that
this
exactly,
is literally like days
kind of...
after they've like killed this monster too. It's very like he's like, oh, you don't want to create a mate for this monster?
Yeah, because he's initially he's like, well, here, come to my laboratory, and I want to show you something, and I think it'll get you on my side. And this is also where the movie goes very off the rails, in my opinion, because he shows him his experiments, and he's got all these jars where he's like, I could create body parts, but I can only create them like small, so I've just got these little people in jars, and it turns into like Alice in Wonderland for like 10 minutes.
Yeah, it's all the like homunculi.
Yeah,
the homunculus,
because they're all very
not
like...
the Full Metal Alchemist kind. The real kind. The real kind? I wouldn't say homunculuses are real, but the literary device, that's a better way to put it.
There we go, yeah.
The storytelling device, homunculi.
But they're all like, they're very whimsical in the middle of this like dark horror movie. He's like, oh, this one is a king and this one's a queen, and I can't keep them apart, so I made a pope to keep them apart. And like there's like just these goofy like silent film antics, and I'm like, I did not expect this in my Frankenstein movie, and I've seen this movie 3 times, and this always takes me off guard.
Well, the first one, it's very like Henry is the weirdest one, but then the like Bride of Frankenstein is like, and everyone else is also extremely odd.
Yeah. Although I did mention like the way, because this is where like it's interesting sometimes how like the script writing pseudoscience predicts real life stuff. Because, like, he talks about the process he made these little people through, and he basically kind of describes, like, what people are doing with stem cells today. Just, like, they're not growing little people, but, like, it was funny to me that they, like, hit on that, like, real-life science without knowing it.
Which, like, I think now you can, like... No, I think you actually, never mind. I think you still have to, like...
You can clone little tiny kings and queens in jars.
No, I think you still have to... Well, I was like... Okay, if anybody knows Shane Dawson and Ryland Adams, I don't watch them, but it was brought to my attention that they are, like, having a baby.
Oh, yeah, with, like, IVF
and it's
stuff.
like, yeah. I'm not saying... I mean, I think it's super cool.
Yeah.
Like, holy shit.
But
yeah, I don't think this film was like prepared for that to be what actual science was.
Yeah, it was just really funny to me.
Yeah.
And as that happens, we cut back to the monster, and again we get this movie really like underlines how like the misunderstood angle, because like immediately he like stumbles on these people like who are like these like girls who are like hanging out by a spring or something, and what like they run away, and one of them falls in as she's trying to run away, and so he like hops in and saves her from drowning, and then she's immediately like, you know, freaking out and screaming, and everyone's like, oh, he's trying to kill her, get him. And they kind of chase him off, and it's again like this sad moment because he was like trying to do the right thing, and he's still getting like chased. And
yeah, it's like they like double whammy it. He both like fixes his sin from the previous film where he accidentally kills the little girl by drowning her on accident, but like it's also, I wonder if there was more creative freedom to like explore some of that ambiguity and to like frame the monster as a like misunderstood character, because of the success of the first one.
That would make sense. Also, I wrote they locked him up, which is funny, because I think in a few of these movies they try locking him up, and it's like, where are you gonna go with that, guys?
Well, it's like a joke.
Also, I guess because I feel like this movie emphasizes him as being like superhuman a little more, because like in the first movie I didn't feel that he was like any stronger than just a guy who's really strong. Whereas in this, he feels a little more like supernaturally strong.
Yeah, that's
true. Where he's like shrugging off bullets and breaking out and like rampaging. Also,
that in a way feels like it's like the Avengers of its time, because the stakes constantly have to be raised.
Yeah.
Each new one.
Actually, bringing up the Avengers is interesting because I remember reading when the original comic books for the Hulk were being written. A lot of the Hulk's writing was inspired by Frankenstein, in that like he's being misunderstood and pursued and just wants to be left alone and all this stuff. Um, yeah. And he, I didn't know where to go with that. I was gonna make,
no, I was gonna make an abstract joke about Black Widow and the Hulk.
Hey there,
but then
guy.
I was like,
Sun's
nobody's
getting
gonna
real
get that. Yeah, I was like, I don't know where I was going with that. Sorry about that.
No, we're good. Because I was also gonna, and they're both green, maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, I pointed out, like, he's rampaging around, and he like, there's this, like, Romani family who's, like, sitting outside their cart or whatever, and he, like, steals some food off their fire, and I just thought it was an interesting scene that they have this family that's, like, coded specifically to fit in this certain, like, archetype for no reason than to just kind of have them there.
Yeah, and it's almost like it's like I feel like you could go into that like a little bit more for sure in reception theory.
Yeah.
They're like, because they don't really like, they just kind of let him, right?
Yeah,
they don't like give him food, but he like, you know.
Yeah, well, yeah, because they're like talking and just, well, that was the interesting thing to me was they weren't seeing how, because like I watched The Wolfman not long ago, which was made a few years after this, and I feel like the Romani in that were a lot more like stereotypical than like it's not like these people aren't stereotypical, but they're just kind of like a normal family.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the way they function, and then also the way we haven't gotten to him yet, but like the blind hermit.
Yeah.
It's almost like they're touching on like all of these like people who have been forced and misunderstood. Like,
yeah.
I wonder if it's like a direct comparison where like Romani people are kind of villainized. They're not kind of, they are villainized, and they're like constantly forced out of the places they occupy and like painted as villains. You know what I mean? I feel like it's like maybe that's what he was trying to draw attention to.
Yeah, maybe. Because again, actually, like the next scene, he stumbles on this cabin where there's this like old blind. I think he's like a hermit monk.
My favorite.
Of some kind. He's
my favorite scene.
He's like playing the violin, and the monster comes in, and because he's blind, he doesn't like judge the monster based on his appearance, and he's like, oh, you're mute and I'm blind, and God brought us together to be friends, and it's like this really like wholesome moment because he's finally like met someone who's like nice to him and like wants to interact with him and stuff. And it's this is where my brain I was like, is there gay subtext, because he's talking about how they were like brought together to be lifelong partners, and like maybe I just can't look at like two people becoming friends on screen anymore. But
and the cigar smoke is a metaphor for other things.
Yeah, we get the smoke good, fire bad kind of thing. Any
smoke good, smoke good.
I think
good.
another thing that kind of underlines what we've been talking about is he teaches the monster to speak some words, and like I think it illustrates that like he's had this potential in him this whole time, and just never had anyone who was willing to like spend the time with him and like work on stuff. And like it's a very like wholesome, like the wholesomeness and stuff is like really striking after like everything that like has gotten us up to this point.
Yeah, the scene is incredible. The whole scene is incredibly charming.
Yeah. And then these two guys who have been searching for the monster wander into the cabin, and they're like, hey, shit, that's the creature we've been tracking through the woods.
Smoking a J with this old man. He's like, he's so dangerous. They're both like, whoa, what's going on?
Yeah.
They're just like Cheech and Chong in there with the cigar, and these two guys have to come ruin it.
Yeah. What dicks.
I know, right?
And so the monster tries to fight him off, and in the battle, like the shack gets burned down, and the monster like has to run off. And now he interestingly, I think this is supposed to be the same graveyard that he runs to that was in the first movie, because it looked like the same graveyard with like the crucifixes and everything.
That would make sense because technically these are like so close.
Yeah.
In time.
And again, I think that shows how he's getting pushed further and further out to the place where Henry kind of like willingly went in the first movie. And in here he just so happens to meet Dr. Pretorius, who's like looking for body parts, according to what Henry told him. And Pretorius kind of like is able to work this to his own advantage, because the monster, using the monster's newfound love of smoke and alcohol, which I feel honestly. But he's like, oh yeah, I'll be your friend. You can be pals with me. And he I can't remember what the exact exchange is, but the monster brings up something about like wanting a mate and wanting a like a woman to be with him or whatever. And Pretorius kind of he realizes he can use this basically. And so he kind of joins forces with the monster, and they go back to Henry and kidnap his wife. And they're like, well, so you wouldn't do what I said, or you wouldn't join me in making a new monster, so now the monster and I are gonna like hurt your wife if you don't do what we say, basically. And he kind of like he kind of taunts Henry with the fact that he's been able to like make friends with this monster, or with the creature, because he's like, again it's kind of like rubbing in his face that he wasn't like as evil as Pretorius is, that he's still like doing a better job as a caretaker than Henry did, kind of.
Yeah. Which is ironic because Pretorius doesn't actually have the means to create in the same way Henry does.
Yeah.
So the film almost is making this statement about like, it's just so fascinating. The statement's it's almost like, I wonder if it's like semi-religious, a statement where like it's like the creator is unable to like actually take care of what they've created. I wonder if it's like meant to be religious in a way.
Yeah, I don't know.
I'm sure there's something there, but like I think it's like very deliberately done, that Henry just can't engage with the monster on this like emotional level that he needs.
Yeah. And they have this kind of like confrontation between the two of them, where like the monster doesn't like him and he doesn't like the monster, and like there's no reconciliation really. But they both basically like force Henry to get the parts to make the monster a mate, basically. And there's this to show how evil Pretorius is. Henry's like, we need a fresh heart. And they're like, oh yeah, we'll get one, because Pretorius has his own kind of like henchman, and he's like, oh yeah, go get one from the morgue, wink wink. And then we see the guy go out and like kill the first like person he sees and take their heart, and then like come back and he's like, oh, I got it, it's really fresh. And Henry's like, what? And he's like, from the morgue. And so I think just to illustrate the like difference,
I also
like,
on this note, just a quick note, I love how we start to get like other spooky places, like we get like the crypt and the morgue and like all these spooky places. Last time we just got a lab, you know what I mean? And so I kind of love that,
which I did like, because now they're back in the lab and it is like set up the same as it was in the last movie, which I thought was like some cute like continuity, because it's like he's returning to the same place.
Beautiful. He's returning to the same place canonically like days later.
Yeah, like within the week. And yeah, there's like some tension between him and the monster, because the monster's like, the monster's like, do this now, and he's like, I can't keep doing this. I'm really tired. Like like me working on like papers in school.
Oh wow, yeah.
But so after all this tension, they're able to they get to the creation of the bride, and like I felt like the cinematography for her creation was so much more intense, which I think shows like how like over the years they just like developed the craft a little more.
Yeah, for sure. That's what it feels like.
Because we get like a lot more like crazy sparks and machinery, and we get these really like stylized like Dutch angles on like Henry and Pretorius, where like their faces are all covered in shadow, and it's like much more dramatic, and they did a good job of like raising the intensity level. While this is happening, the monster like gets into a scuffle and throws the evil henchman off the side of the castle, and nobody really cares.
Everybody's like, whatever. Which just the henchman through line. Nobody cares about the henchman.
Yeah. Which I guess again is like a good parallel, because I think those are the two parallels with. You okay there?
Sorry about that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry. My something just fell over there. I have two naughty cats. Sorry.
The parallels with Henry and Pretorius, where Henry was like, he crossed the moral horizon of stealing dead body parts, but Pretorius was willing to just have people killed. And then Henry got his assistant killed and felt bad about it, whereas Pretorius kind of doesn't really care either way.
Which, ironically, the way they interact with Frankenstein is so, like, inverse of that, so it's so interesting.
Yeah.
Because it's almost like, Pretorius is ready to go all the way for his creations and still be that loving thing to the creation that guides them. But Henry is almost not willing. Henry's not willing to do that.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's a kind of like, honestly, in a way, I think it's like an interesting commentary on Henry's character. It's like he's not fully invested.
Yeah.
In what he says he wants to do, you know?
Yeah, especially like I wish we were watching if we ever get a chance to talk about the Peter Cushing Frankenstein movies. I think comparing the two takes on that character would be really interesting, because that goes almost the complete opposite way, where he's like, I am so justified in doing what I'm doing that literally anything I have to do doesn't matter.
Yeah. It really brings up that Kant, like the philosopher.
Not the Australian swear word.
Not the Australian swear word, which is, you know, he had this like he deposited this question, this like moral question, where it's like what matters more, the result or like how you get to the result? Like what's more morally significant? Doing whatever for the thing in favor of, or like is the morality of how you do something? And they definitely foil themselves really strongly with that question.
We're talking about we've talked about Kant, we've talked about Descartes. We're being like really high-minded tonight.
We're so philosophical. I'm just really tapping into my high school speech and debate skills.
There we go.
My high school speech and debate training. And so almost it's kind of funny how this kind of feels like on cue too, because it's like they finish and then he's like, oh hey, is that my bride?
Yeah, because that's they introduce him, they bring her out. Also, I can't remember the name. I think it's like Elsa Lancaster or something.
It is Elsa. It is her. Yeah. That is her.
Okay, the actress that played the bride is also the actress that played Mary Shelley in the intro, and I think that's just directorially, that's an interesting choice.
Oh yeah. Double casting. Wow.
Because it almost like it goes back to like how the first movie, how they tried to do parallels between Victor and the monster, or Henry and the monster. Have you ever seen, there was like a stage play with Benedict Cumberbatch where they had him and another guy alternated, like they both played Victor Frankenstein and the monster, but they would like switch roles between scenes. And so
I did hear about that, but I didn't actually get to see it. I missed the NT Live. I had something else I was doing that day, actually. I actually am really sad that I had to miss that.
Yeah, I haven't seen it fully, but I thought that was really interesting in the context of everything. But
yeah, I love stuff like that.
But yeah, so they unveil the bride, and she's like kind of like freaked out by stuff, and like the monster goes over to her, and she like screams and freaks out because she was just born like a minute ago, and then they like calm her down, and the monster comes over, and there's like a moment where you're not sure, and then she like screams and freaks out again, which like makes the monster pissed off because he's like, of course not even this person like understands me or whatever.
Which I think about this all the time, but he says she hate me like everyone or something like that.
He was
there
the
is a
himself.
spike. It literally no shit. There's a Spike Lee film called She Hate Me that I think he got the name from this.
That would.
I can't confirm that, but it's like literally the exact same wording, and I think he got it from this.
Shit.
Somebody fact check me in the comments. But
Spike Lee, if you're listening.
I think about it all the time.
Yeah. Well, also we talked.
I haven't actually seen it, but yeah. Anyway,
like it's interesting, like the pop culture footprint of the bride, considering how little she's even in this or any other movie.
Or like, what I think is fascinating is not necessarily even that. What's fascinating to me, because I mean that in a way, I think some images are strong enough to like have that cultural impact.
For sure, yeah.
But what is more shocking to me is that people like, it's like the alt like love story, like not like alt as in like philosophical or anything, but like alternative style. Like everybody eats up Bride of Frankenstein and Frankenstein. She does not like him.
Yeah,
and I think it's interesting. You have this like, it's almost like Eve becoming aware of the Garden of Eden, and it's like she's becomes this monster, so she's almost able to make all these comments about the world and act. Because she's a monster, she doesn't have to act like a woman of the time, and so her being able to reject him is a very, very interesting thing. And I wish more people acknowledged that.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah, it's sad more people don't.
Yeah, it's almost like as someone who was raised like very like against the like I don't know, the like raised very like specifically with the Bible, like it's interesting hearing people talk about like Lilith lore, which is a very like post Bible thing, but like it kind of reminds me of that too, where it's like, yeah, like the woman who doesn't comply kind of deal.
Yeah, for me, the bride reads a little bit more like Eve eating the apple than like Lilith in particular. But I think there is a read where you could read it as Lilith lore for sure. She's like, Frankenstein, you can't. I have to top you.
Yeah, but also like we don't really. I don't think we ever know what happens to her. Because there's like,
yeah, she gets out. She's like,
she runs.
I don't know.
Yeah,
she runs off,
and then over the course of the like 7 or 8 movies that follow this, nary a peep. She divorced
Frankenstein. She married the old man, the old hermit.
There we go. Yeah. Oh my god.
Honestly, I want a series about her.
What are the legal rights on the Bride of Frankenstein? Could you get away with making
oh my god,
an
wait.
film?
Is it like free use now?
I don't. Yeah, I'm not sure what the deal is on that. I mean, I would assume
the work is in the public domain.
Oh shit, really?
And although there may or may not have been a copyright notice, the copyright was not renewed.
Huh. That you know what, that makes sense, because that's why the first two movies were on archive.org.
You know what? That makes so much sense. You have to wait a minute. I don't wait. Okay. Okay, got it. There's like you can have the Bride of Frankenstein character, but some of the you'd have to style her differently. There it's like the nuance comes in how you represent the character. So you can have a movie about Bride of Frankenstein, but you can't stylize her like she's stylized in this movie.
Okay, that makes sense.
Which, I mean, honestly, that's fine.
Fun fact, did you know
just give her like a stripe like that woman from What Not to Wear.
Perfect.
What were we gonna say? Sorry.
Based on someone looked at like set photos or like old props or something, and the like hair piece that she wears in this, the hair is actually like this kind of like auburn red color. So the Bride of Frankenstein is actually a ginger.
So she doesn't have a soul, is what you're saying.
Exactly. But yeah, so back on track. The monster, basically, he kind of like, he hits this point where he kind of realizes that like what he was trying to like, he kind of like, I mean, it's very sad, but like he hits this point where he's like, I was trying to like make someone to accept me, and I think no one's going to accept me, and I've got to like deal with that. And like, so he like starts trashing the place, and like he hits this switch that's like gonna make everything explode, because it's like, I don't know, it's like on the machinery, and he's like, don't hit that or it'll make everything explode. And
she said
or I can't remember, because there's an exchange where Henry's like, don't do that, it'll kill us all, and the monster's like, you go, you live. And like the way he says it, like you hear this like pain in his voice where he's like processing everything that happened. And I'm like, God damn, Boris Karloff. He gets like a handful of speaking lines in this movie, and he just killed it with that last one.
Yeah, Boris Karloff really slays. He stays, he slays. He doesn't stay. And he definitely blows up everybody.
Yeah. And he like makes Pretorius stay in there with him. And so yeah, like Henry and Elizabeth escape, and then the monster blows up the lab, and like the two of them head off, and I guess like having presumably learned something through their experiences.
And then it's like the ending of The Graduate. They get away, but are they going to be happy? Just kidding. No, it's not like that at all.
They get into like a red car and drive off.
They get into the bus and they're like, do we actually want to be together? We don't know.
And again, like very like philosophically bittersweet. With like it's almost like, again, there's almost a parallel of like the creature now like making Victor's mistake, where he's like, I want to create something that'll make me happy, but then he realizes he doesn't have the like capacity to give that thing what it needs. In this case, being like the bride and stuff.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting like, I wouldn't say the film is feminist, but it's an interesting film to feminists read.
Yeah, for sure. Because it's got a lot. It's got a lot more going on. Like I feel like, which again I think is also like because of some of the limits. I think the first movie wasn't allowed to say everything it was like set up to say, and so I think by watching them together, they kind of like complete each other's like statements a little more, I think.
Yeah, it feels like honestly in some ways they feel like a part 1 and part 2 of the same film.
Yeah. Which I guess they... Which
would still put it under a lot of fucking films that today.
Yeah.
Only 2 hours and however, but what were we gonna say? Sorry.
They because I think in the original book, it's like he's like going to create a bride for the monster, but he destroys the body before he ever brings life to it. And so I think that's like, with these first two movies, they kind of are able to get away with saying they were inspired by the book. And then for like the rest of the series now after this, we're completely like off the rails of what the original novel was about. And that's also interesting.
No, I see what you mean. Yeah, because I feel like it's like it's like they definitely do. Yeah, what part stops like fully with the novel? Does the novel just end, or not the novel? Sorry, does the play just end with the first movie, and then this is all like extrapolated after, or does like it go into this?
The play might end where the first movie did, because again, like there's not like a script you can look at to see what exactly the play covered. But
yeah, that's right. You were saying it was like lost.
Yeah, or it's like, yeah, there's like a couple copies, but they're not like publicly available.
Oh, dang. That's wild. We gotta go find these copies.
Yeah, like one of them I know is, I guess, in the possession of a like history professor who is descended from the lady who wrote the original play.
Oh.
Which is interesting and bonkers.
Yeah, huh.
But yeah, I would be really interested to see like how the play plays out.
I wonder, you know how I told you about that secret occult library?
Oh yeah.
I would like see, I don't know, maybe it's there. It's like an only reference library. So obviously
so
every
crazy.
single
But yeah, so
that is the Frankenstein and the Bride of Frankenstein.
Yeah, we're doing these in couplets because we have a lot of movies to cover.
Yes, and we're doing them in couplets.
Yeah, which I think works, because I've noticed a lot of movies in this series so far seem to like kind of pair up.
Yeah, and like these ones are very short.
That too.
Which kind of renewed my faith in storytelling a little bit, because I'm of the opinion that a lot of modern movies are way too long.
Yeah. Like sometimes I get like having like an epic scale story, but a lot of times you're just...
Yeah, if it's like Lawrence of Arabia or like The Irishman.
You can leave stuff on the cutting room floor. It's okay.
Yeah, but like I'm gonna be honest, guys, like 3-hour family dramas, I think I'm done. I think I'm okay. I'd much rather watch like an hour-long monster movie, you know?
Yeah.
But Sly.
Yeah. So yeah, we will see you guys next time. We can't do the werewolf noise anymore. As
I was gonna
outro.
be like,
I hate that. We are not doing that.
Sorry.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Hey everyone, Evie here. If you enjoyed today's episode of Movies After Midnight, consider giving us the old like and subscribe so that you can stay up to date when we drop new episodes. If you didn't enjoy today's episode of Movies After Midnight, consider following me on one of the many social media platforms out there and leaving criticisms or strongly worded hate speech. Either way, thanks for tuning in. Hopefully I'll see you next time.